Hi, this is Les and Amy from the RevGenetics podcast. You can listen to the podcast on YouTube and now on Spotify, where we do a deep dive on supplements and longevity studies.
Yeah, and today we are getting into a really fascinating paper from 2026.
Right. It is all about the genetic blueprint that connects how long you live with how physically strong you stay as you get older.
Exactly. So we're going to look at why some people live to 100 but get really frail, while others just stay super strong right up until the very end.
So to start us off, we usually think of living a long time and staying physically strong as two completely different things, right? For a long time, scientists looked at extending your overall lifespan as one major goal, and then preventing muscle loss as this, totally separate goal, which makes a lot of sense on the surface.
It really does, yeah. But this new study looked at massive amounts of DNA data, like a giant library of human genetics, to see if the instructions for both are actually connected. And first, they had to figure out how much of aging is just driven by our DNA in the first place, because it is not just luck or, eating your vegetables.
Yeah, genetics actually control about 20 to 30% of our lifespan, and if you live past 85, that jumps up to 40%. But the really wild part from the paper is that muscle strength is even more hardwired into our DNA. It sits at about 52%, which is just a huge statistical signal.
Wow, so basically, more than half of your muscle strength as you age comes down to the genetic blueprint you were born with. That is incredible.
Exactly. Think of your body like an old house. Your genes are the foundation, and they decide how well the house stands up to bad weather over the years. The researchers wanted to know if the blueprints for the roof, which is your lifespan, are on the exact same page as the blueprints for the load-bearing walls, which represent your muscle strength.
Oh, I love that analogy. So what did they actually find in those blueprints when they looked closely at the cells?
Well, they found specific genes that do very different things. High activity in two genes called APUAC1 and TOMM40 really increases your chances of living a super long time, like pushing you past the 90th percentile. But then they found two totally different genes called DYM and TGFA, which heavily lower your risk of losing muscle as you age.
Wait, so if I happen to have, high activity in all four of those genes, does that just mean I am guaranteed to be a 100-year-old bodybuilder? Does it mean diet and exercise do not matter at all?
I wish it worked like that, but no. Genetics just load the gun, and your environment, like your diet and your sleep, pulls the trigger. It is really just about shifting your odds and reducing your risk, so it does not mean you can just sit on the couch forever.
Right, that makes total sense. So it is a huge advantage, but not a magic ticket.
Exactly. But here is the real twist they discovered. The study found that the biological paths for dying prematurely and the paths for losing muscle are deeply tangled together. The exact mechanisms keeping you alive are the same mechanisms keeping your muscles from breaking down.
So they are not just parallel roads, they are literally the exact same highway. That completely changes how we should look at getting older.
Exploring how these deep biological pathways work is exactly why this episode is brought to you by RevGenetics, supporting our deep dive into the latest science.
They have a long-term focus on evidence-based natural compounds for aging research, including things like NMN and resveratrol.
Which is so cool because understanding these longevity supplements ties right back into how our cells manage energy as we age.
So getting back to that shared highway, the researchers found 6 specific genes that actually multitask. They are actively managing both your lifespan and your muscle strength at the exact same time.
Multitasking genes. That is so interesting. What exactly are they doing behind the scenes?
Well, several of them live right next to each other in a specific neighborhood of your DNA, specifically on chromosome 19. And that neighborhood acts like a command center for 2 really important things, which are processing fat and making cellular energy.
Okay, processing fat. How does that connect to keeping our muscles strong as we get older?
So think about a really nice cut of steak, like a ribeye. It has all those white lines of fat running through the meat, right?
Okay.
On a grill, that marbling is amazing. But inside your own bicep or your leg muscles, that fat is terrible news. If those chromosome 19 genes fail to clear out the fat, your muscle literally fills up with it.
Ugh, that sounds awful. So the muscle just loses its power because it is all clogged up with fat tissue.
Right, the fat actually becomes toxic to the cells. It damages the mitochondria, which you can think of as the little power plants inside your cells. So the muscle is not just shrinking, its internal energy grid is basically failing.
And because those tiny power plants fail, it drags down your overall lifespan too. Wow, it is a total system failure. But what about those other 2 genes you mentioned earlier? The ones that specifically protect the muscles?
That is where the research takes a massive turn. One of them, called TGFA, does not actually work on the muscle fibers directly at all. It actually protects your motor neurons.
Wait, neurons, like the nerves in your nervous system.
Exactly. We usually think of muscle weakness as the physical muscle itself tearing or wearing out. But muscles only move when a nerve fires an electrical signal and tells them to move. As we age, the nerve wires that connect to our fast muscle fibers, the ones that help us sprint or catch our balance if we trip, they start to disconnect and die off.
Oh, wow. So the muscle just gets orphaned. It shrinks away because it is simply not getting any signals from the brain anymore.
Exactly. And that TGFA gene acts like a shield for those nerve connections. It keeps that vital wire plugged into the muscle, and it goes even deeper. The researchers checked a huge database of human diseases and found that these exact same multitasking genes are heavily linked to severe brain diseases.
Wait, really? Like what kind of brain diseases are we talking about?
Things like Alzheimer's and cognitive decline. The exact same genetic traffic jam that causes you to lose your grip strength is what causes the brain to lose its sharpness. Your brain uses a ton of energy, so if the fuel lines are broken, both your brain and your muscles suffer.
That is absolutely mind-blowing. So the plaques and tangles we see in the brain with Alzheimer's are caused by the same fat-clearing issues that cause that bad marbling in our muscles.
Yes, they are fighting on the exact same genetic battlefield, which means future treatments might not just be a bunch of separate pills. We could theoretically target these specific genes to fix the fuel lines and the nerve wiring all at the same time. You would be fixing the root cause of muscle loss and memory loss together.
That is so incredibly optimistic. It makes anti-aging sound less like chasing magic and more like just doing a really precise tune-up on a car's engine.
Right, so the next time you are lifting weights, just remember you are not only building muscle, you are actually reinforcing the wiring for your entire body and your brain.
That is such a great way to look at it, and it really changes how you think about staying active.
We hope you enjoyed today's podcast on the published science and found it interesting.
Thank you for listening to the RevGenetics podcast.
RevGenetics.com for the best longevity supplements on Earth.